Imposter syndrome in the workplace is a problem, not only for the employees who are suffering from imposter syndrome, but also for management and business owners. Hi, my name's Monica and I'm a self-development coach and a mind-body practitioner, and today I'm going to be talking to you about imposter syndrome. So I'm hoping by the end of this video you will get an understanding of what imposter syndrome is, who it impacts, where it comes from, how to recognize it in yourself and in others, and also have some solutions and tools to hand in order to start overcoming imposter syndrome. Let's start off with what is imposter syndrome. So, imposter syndrome is a mental condition that occurs when high-achieving people attribute their success to luck or external factors. So, it's high-achieving people who think that their talent, their success, their hard work is because of opportunity, it's because they were in the right place at the right time. They may also think it could be to do with their faith and religion. They do not see that their hard work and the outcomes of their hard work is due to themselves and how talented they are in what they do. The term imposter syndrome, it was initially called imposter phenomenon, and then it turned into imposter syndrome. It was coined by two psychologists called Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes in 1978. So now you know what it is. Well, where does it come from? So there's still a lot of ongoing research in imposter syndrome and where it actually comes from. So if you're watching this video in a year's time, 2 years' time, it might have changed and the research might have developed and evolved further. But right now in this moment, there's some research around the fact that it comes from households or work environments where there are extreme praise on one side and then extreme criticism in the other. So for example, you might be doing your job and your manager might give you a lot of praise for certain parts of your work, but then might criticize you quite extremely for other parts of your work, which then kind of leaves you in a bit of limbo, not knowing if you're doing a good job or not doing a good job. This doesn't only happen at work, this can also happen at home. So if you're brought up in homes where you're getting praised for one thing, then you're getting criticized for the other, it can then develop imposter syndrome quite early on in your childhood. There's also some research that imposter syndrome tends to rear its ugly head when you're in an environment where the outcome is praised, not the progress in getting to the outcome. So for example, if you work in an environment where it's very much results driven and no one really cares about the effort and the focus put into trying to get there, it can breed imposter syndrome. And again, we can relate this to our childhood, our upbringing. If you're in an environment where your parents were always happy with you when you had achieved something, you had got really good results, you had passed your driving test first time without any failures, and actually there were no room for failures, it was always about success, chances are you could have experienced imposter syndrome from a very early age. Who does imposter syndrome impact? Now, unfortunately, like any other mental health condition, it doesn't discriminate. It can literally impact everyone and anyone. However, based on the research right now, it seems to impact certain groups more than others. So these groups are women who are in a work environment where there are very limited women and the environment that they work in is very male dominated. It impacts people of colour that are in environments where they can't see someone that looks like them. It also impacts people from a low socio-economic background, and it can impact people who are first generation professionals, first generations doing something that the rest of the community are not doing. They're stepping out their comfort zone and they're doing something different. So now let's deep dive into the problem and how it impacts the workplace. So I've seen a quote from Harvard Business Review in 2021, and the quote says, "People with imposter syndrome are less likely to speak up with new ideas or take risks." The Journal of Behavioral Science quotes that employees dealing with imposter syndrome may push themselves to exhaustion, contributing to burnout and job dissatisfaction. APA Monitor on Psychology has said that imposter feelings can lead to employees prematurely exiting roles they are excelling in because they believe that their success is undeserved. So what are the business impacts of imposter syndrome? Well, there's missed opportunity for innovation. There is delays in project timelines due to over-checking work. And there is a plate-safe culture instead of growth-orientated one. So workplaces where people are riddled with imposter syndrome are not workplaces that are growing fast. They're not workplaces where things are innovative, where people feel safe. They're workplaces where there are delays to the deadline because a side effect of imposter syndrome is over-checking, over-preparing their work. So the goalpost for that deadline will constantly move. There's also higher rates of absence in work environments where there's a lot of imposter syndrome. There's more mental health related leave or disengagement. So if employees are long-term sick in an organisation, chances are it's breeding a culture of imposter syndrome. There's reduced overall team morale, loss of valuable skilled employees. So skilled long-term employees or even short-term employees, if they're skilled and they're really good at what they do and they leave, chances are it's because the environment is riddled with imposter syndrome. There's increased recruitment and training costs. So if you're a business owner and you feel like you're always trying to recruit someone, chances are you have an imposter syndrome situation. And there's difficulty building a long-term team. So companies where there is a lot of imposter syndrome breeding, they really struggle handing on to their members of staff. So if you are applying for a job, I would definitely check the turnover. I would definitely talk about sickness. I mean, I don't know how openly you can do that in an interview, but maybe during your probation, try and have a look at the team. Do people take a lot of time off? Does it seem like there's a lot of sickness, absences? Does it feel like the goalpost is always moving in terms of deadlines? Are there people in the team that are over-checking, over-preparing work? Chances are it's an environment where there's a lot of imposter syndrome. Now, as I've mentioned, I do go into companies and I talk to them about what it is. I help managers and team members understand how to see imposter syndrome symptoms within themselves day to day and also how to see it within others. I give useful tools and exercises where people can start making change from today. One of the things that I would say about imposter syndrome is that, especially in the workplace, it can look very different. Like I said, I feel like imposter syndrome is on some sort of a spectrum. For certain people, it looks like they are always exhausted. They are always working really hard. They don't prioritize their self-care. They might not take lunch breaks. They might be the first person in the office and the last person to leave. They might also praise the fact that they work so hard. I have worked with people that have said that they've caught the train at 5-6 o'clock in the morning to go to the London office, and they have worked from 5-6 o'clock in the morning to prepare for the meetings in that day. And people around me and that person have praised them for really good work ethic. Now, is that good work ethic, or is that a person that is struggling and suffering with imposter syndrome? You decide. There are also people on the other end of the spectrum that are underperforming or seem to be underperforming. There's a certain expectation. So remember when I said earlier on, imposter syndrome lives in environments where it's very much results driven. So for example, if that person is working in an environment where they have to hit a sales target, they have to hit a revenue target, they're not hitting that revenue target, it doesn't matter how hard they're working, how many hours they're putting into it. If they don't hit the revenue target or the sales target, they are failing. So therefore, within that company, they're underperforming. They're not like the person that seems to be waking up at 5 in the morning on the train, working non-stop and then working for the rest of the day and working again in the evening. They seem like the total opposite. A person that's not pulling their weight, a person that's not driving results. Now, is it that the company are measuring their success in the wrong way? So yes, we need to deliver revenue in companies, and yes, we need to hit sales targets, and we need to do what we're paid to do. However, there are circumstances outside a person's control. For example, a skills shortage, training shortage, poor management, poor culture, things going on at home, mental health conditions. A lot of external things can be impacting a person's performance. So when companies look at all or nothing, they look at delivering results or nothing, it can breed this expectation that isn't realistic, and it can make people look like they are underperforming. But are they actually underperforming, or do they need some more support? Again, that's for you to decide. Now, when we look at imposter syndrome, it feels like it's very much internal. So we think that we're the only ones that are suffering from it. And looking at this research here, more than a third, so there's 5,000 people surveyed, and a third of those people assumed that their manager rarely or never has experienced imposter syndrome, whilst 26% didn't know whether their manager has or hasn't ever experienced imposter syndrome. And this for me is really important to highlight, because often when we speak about imposter syndrome in the office and we talk to our friends and our colleagues about it, it feels like everybody says, oh yeah, you know, imposter syndrome, I definitely have that. But then when you see that person deliver their work, they don't seem to be struggling from imposter syndrome. And it often feels like people just say it, but they're not really experiencing it. And experiencing imposter syndrome can then feel really, really isolating, because we feel like we're the only ones. And this research here says that more than a third of people surveyed assumed that their manager had never or rarely ever experienced imposter syndrome. So that just shows that we who experience imposter syndrome feel very much isolated and feel very much alone. We can safely say that we're not alone, but yet we do feel like we're alone in the moment. Now, imposter syndrome is a funny term, because when we think of imposter syndrome, and now I've defined what imposter syndrome is, a lot of people will be like, well, yeah, I already know that. But it's really difficult to attribute the term and the definition imposter syndrome into our day-to-day lives. I feel like some of my own behaviour looking back, now that I've done a lot of research in imposter syndrome, I look back at certain behaviour and certain mindsets that I had, and I was absolutely riddled with imposter syndrome. But I didn't see it as imposter syndrome at the time. I saw that behaviour and that mindset as me being riddled with anxiety. I saw that behaviour and that mindset with me having a workaholic mentality. I never looked at that behaviour and thought, Monica, you are struggling with imposter syndrome. And I'm wondering, even though as a society we know what imposter syndrome is, we can define it very clearly, we can put our hand up and say, oh yeah, I think I'm riddled with imposter syndrome. Do we really know how it shows up day to day? Can we really attribute some of our behaviour to imposter syndrome? So I'll give you an example of what imposter syndrome sounds like in the workplace. So your manager has asked a question to the group, and the person to the right hand side of you answers the question. And not only do they answer the question, they take up space, they change their tone of voice so it sounds authoritative, and they make some really strong points. Now, me, suffering as a person with imposter syndrome, the first thing I'm going to do is think, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I come up with that? And that is a subtle sign of imposter syndrome. It's looking at people around you and feeling a sense of lack. When you see someone that is doing something that you want to do, that is speaking in a way that you want to speak, it's looking at them with a sense of lack. It's looking at people around you and thinking, oh my God, I should have done that. Why didn't I do that? Imposter syndrome to me feels very, very sneaky, and it feels like it can live within our psyche in plain sight. It's something that is there that we don't realise, and if anything, we attribute that behaviour to a sense of lack, to a sense of low self-esteem, to a sense of always being on the back foot, never being good enough. But I wonder if in that meeting, the minute I had looked over to my colleague and thought, why didn't I think of that? I wonder if in that moment, if I had told myself, Monica, you've just said this to yourself, you're suffering with imposter syndrome. I wondered then if the narrative would have switched, and I wondered then if I would be able to then separate myself from the syndrome, look at it objectively and think, I'm not coming from a place of lack. I'm not coming from a place where I don't feel like I'm good enough. I'm actually suffering from a syndrome here that is just as important as anxiety, that is just as important as depression and any other mental health condition. And it's something that I can distance myself away from. and it's something that I can start making a change to in order for me to move from a certain mindset, which is in a place of being stuck, in a place of being on the back foot, to a place where I am thriving and being authentic. So how do we actually stop imposter syndrome? How do we take it from being behind the shadows, from manipulating our mind and making us internalize our thoughts and our feelings, and actually bring it out to the forefront, look at it objectively and say, you know what, I've got a handle on you? How do we do that? Well, first of all, what we need to do is we need to start having open conversations about it. So if you're at home or at work and you feel like you suffer from imposter syndrome and you might think that others could be feeling the same as you, the best thing you can start doing is open the conversations around imposter syndrome. There are a lot of companies out there that really focus on mental health and well-being and want to create a really good culture. So you could easily put your hand up, speak to your manager or someone in the team and say, I would love to run some workshops where we talk about how we feel in terms of imposter syndrome. How does it show up for us? Has it shown up for us in this career, in other careers, in other jobs, in other companies? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? And start opening up those conversations. The other thing that we can do as well is start raising our awareness of what imposter syndrome is and start training others to identify what imposter syndrome looks like. Now, me myself, I go into companies, I host workshops on imposter syndrome, I run through what it is, where it comes from, just like I have now. But what I've also done is I have created personas. So these personas, they depict what imposter syndrome is, but they depict certain sides of imposter syndrome. So each person is imposter syndrome, but they show up very differently. I take those personas with me in my workshops with employees, and I help employees figure out in a very relatable way where they feel like they sit on the spectrum of imposter syndrome. Because based on the research that I've done, it feels like imposter syndrome is a spectrum. I don't think one shoe size fits all. From the personas that I've created, it can show up very differently and people can identify with 1, 2, 3, or maybe all of them. So I think having something like personas in place to really educate people on what it looks like as a person and what the business impact is of imposter syndrome can be really, really helpful in then relating yourself to that person. If you would like to have a look at my personas and see if any one of those personas is very relatable for you, then feel free to fill out the form. I will link it to the description and I will send you my persona PDF and you can see how you feel, what you think and what comes up for you. Please leave some comments on how you found the experience of the PDF and I hope it works for you. And just to mention as well before I go, I am a self-development and mind and body practitioner, so please take a look at the video that I made before talking to you all about what to expect from your self-development coaching session. Yes, bye for now.